Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. At this rate, I'm going to end up pre-filming like every book review for all of 2025 while I'm recovering from top surgery. It's not a bad thing. I have had a massive growing to be read pile in my living room for like the last year, and I am just plowing through it right now while I'm recovering, which has been awesome because these are all books that I've been excited to read and go through and that are relevant to my interest in piercing and body modification, and I'm finding so many of them better than I even expected. So today we are talking about this beast of a book, 7,000 Years of Jewelry. Now when you first get this, when you first look at it, I'm not gonna lie, I purchased this book and it showed up and I was like, this is like gonna be a coffee table book for me, right? Like there's no way I'm gonna actually read this whole thing. And it is full of beautiful photos and just gorgeous documentation of jewelry across the eras. But I wanted to go through it. So I sat down and I read this thing cover to cover. I honestly read it in 2 days because so much of it is just like pictures and images of jewelry that it's honestly a quick read. And I found this, like, I knew it was gonna be interesting, obviously. But I wasn't sure how like technical or dry or relevant it would be. I found this so much more interesting than I ever expected I would have. First of all, there is so much more documentation that is relevant to the piercing industry than one might expect. Obviously, a book called 7,000 Years of Jewelry is going to cover earrings at some point, and this is broken down by jewelry from different cultures in different time periods, but they covered so much more jewelry relevant to the piercing industry than I would have expected initially just like glancing at the cover. Take a look at these earrings from 1900 BC in Ur. And what I want you to note is like the thicker wire, the thicker earring loop. So one of the things that immediately jumped out at me is the fact that many ancient cultures had what we would today consider stretched ears to some degree. A lot of the earrings that you're seeing worn are at like an 8 or a 6 or even a 4 gauge because that's what they had access to. That's the material and the gold wire and the metal wire that they could work with to create these earrings. So inherently, most folks were wearing their ears slightly stretched and slightly larger. And that made sense because a lot of the jewelry at the time were very large decorative pieces. Small earrings were not in fashion in most cultures until like the 1900s. So a larger wearable surface would allow folks to more comfortably and safely wear these big designs. And these earrings from like the old Babylonian period, I look at these and I marvel at how similar the clasp and closure is on a lot of the ear weights that I wear today. We fast forward 200 years to 17th century BC at this Minoan gold hoop earring. And first of all, like stunning craftsmanship. It's this two-headed snake ring with all of these like charms and decorative elements designed to like dangle and hang off of it. And with these like fine gold sheets, I'm sure it would have caught the light immensely. But notice how thick that wearable is. That to me looks like a 2 or even a 0 gauge. And the ear would have needed to have been thick enough for that wearing surface to fit through the piercing channel, obviously. And the design of this earring as well, it's basically a giant seam ring. I have multiple hoops from Maya and Save products that open and close the exact same way, which is like kind of crazy when you think about it. But you would have had to have a somewhat stretched ear to wear a hoop like this. And this is the common like higher end jewelry of the time that would have been worn by the ruling class, the upper class, and by aristocrats. And it's so cool to look back through it. Now, obviously, for a lot of these cultures, it's because it's the material that was available. It's not necessarily that ear stretching was part of the cultural practice, but more so born of necessity to be able to wear these giant decorative styles and these thicker pieces. But regardless, we can now prove moderate level stretched ears across so many more cultures just by looking at their earrings. So that jumped out at me and I thought that was super cool. Also, honestly, this hoop, I would wear this today. I would wear this today. If some similar design was released by say like Tawapa or something, I would not be surprised. And I think that's so cool. And this wasn't limited to areas of like the Middle East and Africa. Take a look at these earrings that were from Bronze Age Britain. anywhere from about 2100 to 1800 BC. And notice again these larger wearing surfaces. So that hook piece is the wearable of the earring. That to me again is looking mighty like 6 gauge, 4 gauge. So we have record of whether it was cultural to allow folks to be able to wear these very large, heavy decorative pieces, or whether it was just necessitated by material limitations of the time. We know that most civilizations in antiquity had stretched ears to some degree. If they wore piercings, if they wore earrings, they probably had their ears stretched to some degree. They simply did not have the capability of doing super, super, super thin earring wearables, nor would it have been practical with the size and weight of a lot of these designs. And that's just so cool to me as someone who constantly hears people being like, oh, these like kids these days stretching their ears and doing weird stuff to their ears. No, we've been doing this since antiquity. Thank you very much. But then we got into cultures that did actually like practice ear stretching. And of course, we got to talk about Egypt. Egyptian jewelry is just fascinating in general, but what I really want to talk about is these plugs for stretched ears. So take a look at this selection. These are glass pieces. These are glass plugs. These are glass single flare plugs from ancient Egypt. They look so similar to the plugs that we wear now. Nearly identical. And then those hoops pictured above the plugs were also earrings. So these are looking around like a 2 or a 0 gauge to me. And we know that ear stretching was like a cultural practice in ancient Egypt, which I think is just so cool. But it's just so wild to me that these are so... If you told me this was like a new style prototype for Gorilla Glass, I would believe you. And these come from 1400 to 1300 BC, and just, I mean, we've been stretching our ears thousands of years. That's so cool. And even in the description of these, it mentions that these were worn by stretching the lobe so it could pass between the open ends of the rings. And a number of these hoops that also required stretched lobes, one of them came from a child's burial ground. So it's clear that ear piercing was happening very young, and stretching was happening relatively young as well in order for folks to be able to wear the earrings that were relevant to the culture. If we move forward to 1200 to 1000 BC, we have these braided metal hoop earrings that came from Western Europe, potentially around what was Northumberland in England. Look at those, okay. And then look at these ear weights from Maya. Hello. There's something when I read through these books and I do this research and I see these earring designs and these jewelry designs or even these tattoo designs that are so similar to what we are wearing and adorning ourselves with today, it is a moment when it feels like the veil of time is so thin and I can reach through into history and feel that connection with my ancestors and feel that connection with humankind that came before me, and think about a woman in 1200 BC wearing these braided, twisted gold hoops, getting ready for a party and feeling beautiful. And I think about how many days I have put on a incredibly similar pair of earrings and felt beautiful getting ready for an event or an occasion. And it like gives me chills. I open this page and chills. Now, if we want to talk about gorgeous ear weights, we have to talk about these Griffin weights from ancient Greece. Oh my God, look at how gorgeous these are. Spiral style weights, so still a style that you can see produced from many companies today. Very popular style also in India and Bali. The detail on these Griffin heads and on these pieces is stunning. And these are not small ear weights. Even with the little tailpiece, I would say you would need to be around like a 00 to a ½ inch to be wearing those pieces. So again, we're seeing 573 to 475 BC in Greece, folks with stretched ears in order to be able to wear this ornate and decorative and fancy jewelry. They knew what was up. They knew that you couldn't wear a design like this on itty bitty 22 gauge ear hooks. that you needed your ears to be bigger to support this big, beautiful jewelry. And this adornment and this use of jewelry to denote status, to denote wealth, for religious purposes, it was celebrated. It was celebrated. And so, it empowers me in my ear stretching journey and my experience with ear stretching to see for how long across so many different civilizations this was a societal and cultural norm. Now, they had a whole section on Peruvian body jewelry, which of course I'm going to show a bunch of really cool examples of here. My heritage on my father's side is like a wide blend of northern South America and Mexican, and then Spanish. Specifically, I can trace my ancestry through to Peru, to Brazil, to Venezuela, to Ecuador, to Mexico. Every now and again I talk about that and people are like, that's a weird mix of heritage on that side, to which I would point you to the also large amounts of Spanish I have on that side of my family. Yeah, there's some history there that I'm not gonna unpack yet, but part of my family can trace its roots back to areas of Peru where the Moche would have been indigenous. So this has been an area of interest in mine for a long time, and also their sculpture work and their jewelry work was just phenomenal. Look at this carved pendant head, which I love because it features these like big stretched ears. So again, we're talking about a culture where ear stretching wasn't just something necessitated to wear jewelry styles of the time or by material access. Like stretching was also very much a cultural practice. These plugs are gorgeous. The level of detail and the incredible shell and like carving work on this mosaic is literally unreal. And then of course we have this sculptural pot as well that depicts the really large stretched lobes and the very big septum, and that imagery just makes me feel so happy. Like I look at that and I look at my own like 1.5 lobes, and for me, it's such a connection with the culture that I come from. As we move forward in time, we do start to see our abilities with goldsmithing and jewelry making change. So when we skip to like late 6th, early 7th century AD, in what would eventually become Hungary and Ukraine, we see these beautiful earrings. And we see that the earring wearable is getting smaller. So now we've got basically seam rings. Honestly, this looks like a seam ring that a client has maybe taken in and out a few times, or a seam ring that I got frustrated with in my own nose and took out. But yes, so we see that the wearable size is decreasing. This to me is looking like 12, maybe 10 gauge for a lot of these, maybe even 14 on that small one. But we're seeing the refinement of our jewelry making capabilities grow. And as such, we're seeing like wearables and stuff shrink. So this does make me think that for a lot of cultures, having larger lobes was, for many, it was a cultural thing and a cultural practice, but for many, it was necessitated by the limitations of jewelry making at the time. So as we expand our ability to make jewelry in these thinner and finer wearables and sizes, we see that go down. It also becomes a material cost thing. It's a lot more expensive to make those giant, beautiful Griffin ear weights that were bronze and gold plated from Cyprus than it is to make these tiny pieces. So it becomes more affordable when we start making things smaller. Now, we don't have like an economical deep dive on how that affected jewelry making over the years. I wish we did. I think it'd be fascinating. But part of me wonders if why many cultures started to move away from larger gauge pieces was a cost factor. That's just me spitballing, but neither here nor there. Here's another good example of the same style of like seam ring earrings, with these like delicate gold accessory pieces. The beadwork on these, phenomenal. And these are Korean earrings. So we can see that this seam ring style of decorative piece is pretty widespread at this point. And then we bop back over to South America to look at Central Mexico. And again, look at these plugs. Look at these plugs. They're so beautiful. This is an area where jade was very, very sacred, similar to a lot of the jewelry we see in East Asia. And ear stretching was definitely a cultural practice here. This was not stretching just because of limitations of jewelry or material available. This is very intentional stretching. We're seeing plugs and eyelets that are, 3/4 inch, 1.5 inches, 2 inches big. These are cultures that are like actively stretching their ears in order to be able to wear these pieces. And the lapidary work and the craftsmanship is amazing. I mean, look at these librets from like 900 to 1000 AD in central Mexico. If you told me that one of those was made by like Mateo or Jared today, I would believe you. That's identical to where they had it figured out. So many different piercings, stretched piercings, these were common practices at the time. And this book, you know, it focuses on a lot of other jewelry as well. There's many pendants and necklaces and bracelets, but there is a really good feature and display of body piercing jewelry, of stretched jewelry, and of a variety of different indigenous cultures. And I just love that this book sort of covers everything. We have some more plugs from Peru here. These are from 1000 to 1500 AD, and we think they're from the Chimu. It's hard to see. The top one is on a smaller wearable, maybe like a 00 ½ inch, but the lower pair, it's difficult to tell, but there is like a much larger plug soldered onto the back of that like open weave gold that to me looks, in comparison to the upper plug, maybe to be like a 5/8 3/4. So we can see that ear stretching is maintaining a cultural presence even across hundreds of years in different cultures in South America. And then, of course, the book starts to get into the Aztec. This is a septum piece. Oh my God. And the description of it is unreal. It was made of this thin gold sheeting that they describe as would have fluttered and moved as the wearer breathed and moved their head. The effect while wearing this piece must have been unbelievable back in its day. Yeah, because of the thinness of the gold and of the attachments, which are suspended from wires and worn in the nasal septum, the whole piece would have trembled when worn. I can picture it, and I'm in love. Those are just a couple of the pieces that stood out most to me in this book, but honestly, there were so many gorgeous pieces. If I started taking pictures of all of the pendants and finger rings that caught my eye, this video would be 10 hours long. We would be here all day, but I think this is a fantastic book. You know, I'm a big history buff, and I think more of us in the piercing and body modification industry should know our history. So I think this is a fantastic book for everyone. I especially think if you are interested in working front of house, or looking to get into front of house, or currently working front of house, and you want a better understanding of historical jewelry techniques, and also to learn some vocabulary of different methods of doing jewelry, from filigree to millgrain, all of that stuff. The invention and growth of those styles is covered at length in this, and I think that's fascinating. And I think this would provide good talking points for when you're, you know, discussing things with certain clients, being able to link certain styles of jewelry and certain styles of jewelry making to specific cultures, to specific history. These are interesting fun facts for a lot of people, and a lot of clients do care and find those things to be very empowering. And you having that understanding of, I had a client recently who came to get his septum pierced. He's Mexican American, and he got it to commemorate a big moment, a big achievement in his life, and also to honor his ancestral connections. That septum piercings were important in ancient Mexico. And he was really pleasantly surprised when myself and my coworkers not only knew that, but could point him in the direction of jewelry and stones that aligned with that goal. So talking about the sacredness of gold jewelry to the culture, the sacredness of jade and what stones were commonly worn, things like that. It led to it being a really, really empowering experience for him. And part of that was because we had the knowledge to further the intentions he had when he came in for his piercing. So it gives you a lot of knowledge with that. It just helps in general with jewelry knowledge. You can see the evolution of techniques and styles that we still use in jewelry pieces today. You can get a really good feel for what stones are working together, why certain stones are classically combined with each other. So I think this is a really a fantastic one for front of house. If you are a piercer who's passionate about jewelry or just passionate about history, I think this is a great read for you too. I think many piercers are too disconnected from the jewelry side of things. We just kind of leave it all up to the front of house to the point where it becomes a void in our knowledge and our education. And again, the history is important. So knowing that history, knowing what cultures different designs came from, what cultures practice different things, being able to keep that alive, you know, what is remembered never dies. And I think part of our obligation to the history of this industry is to learn it and keep it alive. That includes modern history and going back into antiquity with stuff like this. So I think this is a great one for anyone. And I also just think the images in this book are so stunning. This would be amazing, like keep in the studio book for clients to thumb through while they're sitting in the waiting room, or to bring out and show pictures of different pieces to clients when it's relevant. Yeah, this one's a really, really good one. So it's going up on the media list. If there is a place still in print to purchase it, I will link it in the media list. If not, eBay is your friend. But this is a really good one. I enjoyed it so much, and I am glad it was not as intimidating as I thought it would be when it first showed up. I don't know, probably like fucking a year ago, if we're being honest about the state of my TBR pile. But that's what this recovery is for. We're blazing through it. We're making progress. All right, folks, thanks so much for sitting down and chatting and letting me be a little bit of a history nerd for a bit. Have an awesome rest of your day, and I can't wait to sit down and chat with y'all again soon. Bye.